basic question. Mind mathematics. Can we say Quran was revealed during the month of what does that?
You see, there are two meanings that people mention about what actually it means. One is that the entire Quran was somehow revealed and given to the angels on that night, and then they started taking some parts of it as and when the occasion arose and the passages were needed. The other point of view is which is what I believe is the right one. This particular point of view really makes a few assumptions which I don't find any reason to make them. That it actually says that the Quran began to be revealed on the night of Qadr. So the very first revelation that took place was on the night of Qadr. And by the way, uh, I mean, again, you may not agree with it, but you know, associated with this question as to which night is exactly the night of Qadr, there is an incident that is reported in Hadith that says that the Prophet ﷺ came out from his one of his apartments, and he found some people disputing a little too loudly. And he said to them that, look here, I came to actually tell you which night it was, but I saw you disputing and I forgot it. Now, one of the understandings of this incident is that Prophet actually recalled it. Imagine, this was what, 20 years ago. Things that happened 20 years in the past, you don't necessarily remember them. I mean, so the Prophet did not exactly remember what date it was. But at some point, he actually recalled, why, now I know. And that in his mind, he came out to share it with others, and they were fighting, and they forgot. He forgot. He said, I've forgotten it. It has been taken away from my mind. So it was his experience on a particular night in the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan, when he was 40 years of age, he received the first wahy. So that's why the Quran says, we revealed it in the night of Qadr. That is, we started revealing it on the night of Qadr. Yes, yes. We are seriously short of questions. So please feel free.
Uh, do we have any knowledge that the whole Quran was recited during Taraweeh or Qiyamul during the time of Prophet?
Doesn't seem to be the case. No, he always used to recite long passages, but not the entire Quran.
From where we got that idea that idea of Dora Quran and reciting the whole Quran during Taraweeh?
Okay, you see that your question could actually have two different meanings. I thought you were asking me whether there is some report that the entire Quran was recited in one night. No, there's no such thing. But the Quran has to be completed. Again, there is no mention. No mention. Um, what has happened in the history of Muslims is that Muslims have started memorizing the Quran. Now, obviously, it was for some very special reasons. The Quran had to be preserved fully, and therefore it had to be memorized. So there were many Huffaz. Now, it is it is a part of this process of memorizing that you feel that it's not just that you memorize the Quran, you've got to preserve it as well. You have to continue to keep it in your memory, for which you need to repeat it over and over again. If you don't repeat it, you don't revise it, you lose it. It happens. You memorize a Quran or a part of the Quran, and you're not reading it on a fairly regular basis, you lose it. So first, Taraweeh prayer started happening. And then with the prayer, this concept that the entire Quran is to be recited and completed, it also became a part of the Muslim tradition because of the fact that Hufaz wanted to revise their Quran. So what happens is that a month before the month of Ramadan, the Hufaz start doing it again. And it is an occasion for them to make sure that the Quran that they had in their memory, and then some part of it got lost because of not practicing it regularly, it gets revived. So, but it's not something that has been mentioned, obviously not in the Quran nor in Hadith. All that we need to do is to recite the Quran during the Tahajjud prayer, understand it properly. Now, there's nothing wrong with completing the Quran over a period of 30, 29 nights. What is wrong is, which is what unfortunately is the case now, and probably a natural consequence of this understanding is that the focus was on completing, reading, reciting the Quran. And when you have to recite the Quran completely and you also have limited time with you, then it has to be done in a way that it is to be read very swiftly. That really kills the purpose of reading the Quran. You don't even know what your Imam is reciting. And imagine the book says, Warattil al-Quran tartila, read the Quran slowly. The Quran says that we should do tadabbur on the Quran. It should be understood. So, unfortunately, that is what has happened. And there are certain goals that have become attached to the concept of reading the Quran later on, which were never a part of the original plan, which were not otherwise wrong. But because the focus shifted from reciting the Quran and understanding it to reciting the Quran and finishing it, and as a result, being able to revive its memory so that it really remains in the mind, in the memory. That's what really has happened, and unfortunately, the whole idea has been lost. And add to it that I, I would say the killing concept of sawab. So if you have any regrets that I didn't read the Quran properly, that regret is gone because you are promised that you're going to get such great rewards on reciting the Quran, in the nights of Ramadan. That oh my goodness, you can't even imagine. Imagine if what I'm saying is right. Imagine if the criticism that I'm making is right. What a disaster is taking place. But because it really is a very bad news. Listen to me. Because it's a very bad news, people are not going to take me seriously. Why should people listen to these people who really have no following? Let them say what they're saying and let us do what we are doing. You see, what we are saying is the reality is going to actually be unfolded on the day of judgment. Please don't do anything that would make you feel regretful.
The current compilation of the Quran, that we have, there is a mention of the Nabi Rasulullah who shared that in this with the Sahaba, ensure that the last with scholar, I don't remember the exact number of them. He used to repeat that with the Sahaba to make sure that is the one which is to be repeated till the day of what is that practice is also done during Ramadan or it's just happening all over the time? After
You see, that is also a very important part of the exercise of Ramadan. That's a very important point that you raised. It seems that during the month of Ramadan, in the last 10 nights in particular, when the Prophet ﷺ was doing itikaf, Jibreel alayhi salam would come to him and recite the Quran. He would listen, and then he in turn would recite the Quran, and Jibreel would listen. This Quran was recited in the sequence that we have the Quran in now. In the last two Ramadans in particular, and obviously the very last one in particular, This was done in a special way, done twice. A group of the companions were also present, and it was now recited and recited back by the Prophet, and it was done in the way it was to be preserved. Prior to this, uh, whole process taking place, Muslims were allowed to recite the Quran the way they chose to. Why? Probably because there is there was no way of managing it. Imagine, I mean, people, they learn about the Quran, they disperse, go to their respective places, they recite. Sometimes they don't understand the words properly. All this was happening. However, when this final arrangement was done, all other copies, recitations of the Quran were declared redundant, obsolete, unacceptable. And this version of the Quran is what was introduced. Quite understandable. This declaration that this is the Quran now, which is to be taken as the final word of the Almighty, fully preserved, this news did not go to everybody. And there were people who wrote the Quran prior to the last 2 years of recitation, and they also were reciting it. So later on, when the knowledge of Hadith became more popular and all this information record started getting unearthed and people got hold of it, this understanding of Quran getting recited in various different ways became popular. And sadly, well, there's a good news and there's a bad news. Sadly, many scholars, they started believing that the Quran can be recited in various different ways. The good news is that most common people don't know it. So, this extremely confusing concept, Alhamdulillah, does not bother us because we don't even know it. But the scholars, their vast majority, they believe it. And there was somebody who used to listen to me quite as seriously as you are listening to me. Um, but when he came to learn about the fact that I believe that there's only one Quran and one way of reciting it, he stopped listening to me. I was not worthy enough to be listened to. Can you imagine? I mean, what a tragedy. But this, this is all natural. The only thing that is problematic is we don't talk to each other. I have formed a religious opinion that Jesus is the Son of God and there's another Holy Spirit and Trinity. I'm not going to listen to you. How will you change me? If I refuse to doubt my understanding, how are you going to change? We want to change all Christians. We don't want to change ourselves. So that's what it is.
So I have two questions. One is for Lailatul Qadr. Kind of grew up thinking, knowing that we know it happens every year, but recently I read that that may not be the case. So what's your understanding of how frequently, what do we know about how frequently it happens?
Okay. The Laylatul Qadr is the night when the Quran was revealed. Now, whether it happens every year or not is something we cannot be sure. So, I mean, there is no harm in trying to look for it. I mean, even if it happens, let's say every 10 years or every 50 years, so what? I mean, even every year when we look for it, it's not necessary that it really is on the 27th of Ramadan. Right? So, I mean, it's not quite as much the reality of when it actually took place as an effort. That's right. That's what is important.
And then second question was around etikaf. Since it's not an obligatory, thing. So what are the parameters like in terms of how long if somebody wants to do it, or what do you do with it, or is there any guidelines?
My understanding is that when it comes to all ibadat that are not obligatory, There is an ideal way of doing them, and then there are other ways which are less than ideal, and people can do according to what suits them. A good example is Tahajjud, Taraweeh, Witr. Likewise, in every other ibadat. So, although I mean, itikaf is actually to be done in masjid, which is the ideal. But I don't agree with people who say that if you can't have a masjid, there's no point. No, I don't. I don't think so. I mean, the idea is that you focus, you are isolated. Uh, what are the conditions? The conditions are that you do not have a contact with other people as much as you can manage. You are all by yourself, isolated. Obviously, you are performing all your duties. On some occasions, when it is extremely important, even those people who are in masajid, they can go out. I mean, in those days, there weren't any washrooms in the masajid. They used to go out. So the idea is to focus, to concentrate, to get isolated as much as is possible, and to remember the Almighty, to recite the Quran. But the ideal is that it should be done in the masjid. The ideal is that it should be done for the 9, 10 nights of the last 1/3 of the month of Ramadan. But if somebody cannot do it for the full 9, 10 nights, then lesser number of nights could also be possible. The principle remains the same. Try to do it in its ideal form. If that's not possible, don't miss out every possibility of it.
But generally, just a comment. Generally, both Taraweeh as well has become just a socializing event. It is less to do with the focusing, building the relationship with Allah, but more to do with let's say, even here in the Pakistan, Itikaf is now being planned as a social event. The masjid will plan all the lectures for you. And generally, sorry, I'm not not to say anything about anybody, but generally you come out of Itikaf as a brainwashed person for that particular masjid. Because they are focusing and bombarding the same thing. If they are good, you will learn. If they are not, this is how I've seen it, people.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
right.
that is my sort of personal
That's right.
opinion.
You're
I
right.
have to say
I have also observed it. I have also observed it. I mean, you know, people, when they belong to a certain school of thought point of view, they're so charged with their emotions and understanding that that's what the truth is. I'm saying it with this element of sadness because I'm suffering from some such attitude, behavior right now. So, when a person is so charged with this understanding that his point of view is correct and mine is incorrect, and you can't even talk.
That's not even isolated. You're saying it should be more you're isolated.
Yeah.
This sounds like a.
No, it's a gathering. It's a gathering.
that
No, I said.
they are planning everything, all the lectures they are planning.
Yeah.
You have to be there. So I have seen it in my childhood days. I used to go. It's the same thing.
It happens here as well.
They do it. So there is no way that you can sit down and try to have some concentration or focus on.
And you're right, you come brainwashed. Yeah.
This is how it is.
Yeah. You know, last time you played it foul. You came with a very good question after I had put it off. So if you have a good question, please ask now.
Speak now. I can.
Yeah, please.
This is once again my comment. So
Yeah.
you can validate. But my feeling is yes, one of the aspect which has basically contributed towards not about understanding that the Muslim dividing is a concept of a sunnah. It is there, it has to be there. There is no way that we can challenge Allah. This is Allah Ta'ala's way of rewarding its subjects. But the other thing is that I think when we Muslim, generally somebody who is marketing a product, if the marketing still retains that sense that what product is doing, then people will get the message and always act accordingly. But if you start marketing, let's say, a car as an aeroplane, people will lose that sense. So I think the same thing has happened with the Quran. Quran is the book at the first, at the book of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. Somehow, all the miracles, all the rewards, and all the fazail has lost that message that first and foremost it's a book. So you as a student has to approach it as a book to learn something.
Absolutely.
That is, I think, because of the over marketing or because of this fazail exercise that we always grew up with, that is the reason that it is lost.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. My observation, my understanding is, and again, I can be wrong, and people can blame me for coming up something which is extremely unacceptable and unpleasant. Muslims started feeling Quran is, you can't understand it. As this friend of mine last night, he said, I mean, let's face it, I mean, it's boring. It repeats itself. So what should we do about it? And we can't say it. We can't share it with people. It is because of this reason that the man took me away and didn't ask me this question. He said, I can't ask you this question in public. I said, what a beautiful question. What an excellent question. Why did you not ask it before? Please do ask it in our next program, next lecture, in the question answer session. So when they found it boring, they felt really bad. So how would people then read it? And then there was this idea that we should also not understand it because obviously people didn't have Arabic as the language, and I now know Arabs who tell me that when they do read the Quran, they don't understand it because this Arabic is different from their Arabic. So how can you continue to read the Book of Allah when you don't understand what it's saying? Even when you understand, you get bored. The next best alternative was Sawab. And the end result was that the very incentive, motivation was taken away of understanding the book. So this man who asked me this question, because he was not influenced by the Sawab theory, he was in serious trouble. He said, Khalid Sahib, I have a problem. I'm reading the Quran, but it's repeating itself. So please let me know.
So the thing is that might be this is the thing that Quran is not a storybook. हमने अब तक जो हमने कुरान पे लोगों से सुना हमने लेक्चर सुना ही नहीं उसमें एक चीज को जो है ना वो कॉन्स्टेंटली मिस किया जाता है या बताया नहीं जाता या उन्हें बताना चाहिए कि कुरान इज बेसिकली ए बुक ऑफ रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशंस टू it's a law book, it's a rules and regulations. It tells us how to coexist with others, how to exist, what are the rules and regulations. And जब एक laws या ऐसी चीजें होती है वो थोड़ी सी बोरिंग होती है ये कोई किस्सा तो है नहीं हम स्टोरी तो सुन नहीं रहे और उसमें एक गॉड का जो एक कानून है खुदा का जो कानून है वो और बाय लॉज जो है ये रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशंस है वो रिवील किए गए हैं हमारे लिए और इनको समझने की जरूरत है पढ़ने की जरूरत है और समझने की जरूरत है और दूसरा ये है कि ये एक फाइनल वर्जन है जो हमारी प्रीवियस हॉली बुक्स जो गुजरी हैं उनको निगेट नहीं करता बताता है कई चीजें उनके जो है वो रख ली गई हैं वहां से उठा ली गई हैं उसको दोबारा इसमें रिराइट कर दिया गया है उस चीज को कहा गया है कि वो अब चीजें खत्म हो गई हैं आई मीन एक ब्रॉडर उसको सेंस को नहीं हम आई मीन इस लिहाज से कि कुरान एक रेफरेंस बुक है आपको ये बताया जाए या टीच किया जाए कि यार कोई भी आपको एस्पेक्ट है तो यू कैन रेफर यू कैन टेक गाइडेंस फ्रॉम कुरान आई मीन never have been touched on these kinds of aspects.
You're right.
And second, one more thing is that most of the time, जो चीजें होती हैं, we know that there was some even at the compilation of Quran, some I mean ayats के वो ज़ाया हो गई या कुछ वो हो गया वो सब कुछ. That's the reality उस चीज को. उस चीज को भी जो है ना वो हम नहीं बताते पता नहीं क्या झिझक है हमें ये क्या हम डर लोगों को समटाइम ये क्वेश्चन के यार हाँ कुरान की कुछ आयत वो ऐसे हुई थी जाया हुई थी मगर वो दैट डिडंट क्रिएट अ डिफरेंस फॉर द मैसेज ऑफ द कुरान आई मीन कि वो जो चीजें हैं वो भी मोस्ट ऑफ द लोगों को नहीं पता अब आई डोंट नो जब मैंने पढ़ा ये चीज मुझे भी उस वक्त पता चला पहली दफा कि वो भी एक जब एक आदमी को अचानक कोई बताता है या कोई ऐसी चीज होती है तो वो भी सोच में पड़ जाता है यार कि वो ये हमें पता नहीं क्यों नहीं बताया गया, या हमें क्यों नहीं ये चीज छुपाई क्यों जाती है, या एक उसको भी मेरा ख्याल है थोड़ा सा लोगों को पता होना चाहिए, ताकि they should be prepared to answer that kind of things.
एक बात जो I think we must always bear in mind that there are two levels of information knowledge. One is certain and the other is uncertain. No matter how certain this uncertain is, but it's going to always remain uncertain. Quran is certain. Acha, somebody might say, this is coming from your faith and you're being emotional. No, I'm saying that when you read the Quran and you start believing in it, bear in mind, you are either believing that this Quran is from Allah and whatever it says is right. Quran says that the Quran has been preserved. Any news, any information that suggests that it was lost is uncertain. The Quran says with certainty, authority, that it is complete. Indeed, it mentions that some part of the Quran was caused by the Almighty Himself to be forgotten. He caused it to be forgotten because it was not relevant anymore. लेकिन जो एक बात मैं चाहता हूँ वो आप सामने रखें, when we explain the Quran to anyone, to our own people, to others, strangers, we have to explain the entire Quran, every verse. Some people say, that it's a book that is relevant to us for our purposes, rules and regulation. The fact is, I keep giving this example that in Surah Al-Ahzab, the Almighty says that the Prophet ﷺ, his wives were our mothers of believers. Therefore, when he leaves this world, nobody's going to get married to them. Nobody's going to get married to them. The last of his wives, when she passed away, this verse became practically inapplicable. But it is still very much a part of the Quran because Quran, first and foremost, as I said earlier, is the story of the Prophet, the way he ensured that the Almighty's message is delivered and that warning is put across to the people. And then ultimately, the punishment that visited all nations who rejected messengers, that punishment visits his nation, and then the task gets complete. This Quran mentions it over and over again in 7 different groups. When you read it with this understanding in your mind, I bet, unless you are otherwise bored, and I told you there are people who are bored for some reason, life can be very boring. But if you are in a good state of mind, you read the Quran with this understanding and you're understanding what the Quran is saying, you can never get bored. It talks about Badr, it talks about Uhud, it talks about Ahzab, it talks about the conquest of Makkah, it talks about Hudaybiyah, it talks about so many different incidents, and you are placed as a reader to be right in the middle of that happening, with the Almighty talking to the Prophet, and you being a privileged person knowing everything. You see, sometimes the Quran responds to what the Prophet had in his mind, in his heart. He had a question, he had a feeling, and Allah responding to it. Start developing a taste for it, and you will say, oh my goodness, nothing better than it. Any other book on Sirah, etc., is a human effort. Maybe I was talking to somebody last night, and somebody asked me which book of Sirah you think you would recommend. I mentioned 1 or 2, and then I said, this man, Martin Lings. Martin Lings, he wrote a book, Muhammad. It was a good book of Sirah, written in a very good style. 1 page, 1 story. Excellent language and good stuff, but there are problems. I mean, there is one particular page, I want to tear it off and destroy it. Because that's his understanding. He's presenting something in a way which at times you have a very strong feeling that it's not what the Quran is saying. So the Quran is the ultimate authority. Everything else has to be understood and read in the light of the Quran. Now, even if you have a good
Also
question,
got Pokemon.
Yeah. he rose, he raised his hand first. Yeah.
So I don't recall that Ghamidi or Dr. Shilal said that ayah which says that some of the part are forgotten in the Quran. They are, if I remember correctly, and please correct me, that contextually, if we look at that ayah, that basically is not talking about it's basically talking about the sequence of the Allah books, and he's talking about some of the things are in the previous books are now forgotten and revised and finalized in this. It's not to saying about the Quran. Something like that.
There are two things. One is a verse in Surah Al-Baqarah. Ma nansakh min ayatin aw nunsiha illa ya'ti bi khairin minha aw misliha. That is about the previous books. And then there is a verse in Surah Al-Ala which says, you will not forget anything except for what Allah would do. So there could be some verses. They are not even relevant anymore. I think somebody who brings those verses now through some research will do no service. And if in Allah's planning it was meant to be forgotten, let those verses be forgotten. It is this Quran from Al-Ham to An-Nas, which is the source of guidance, fully preserved for all times to come until the day of judgment. Last question for the last man who came.
So, although there is mentioning of prophets in the Quran, but the way the story of Hazrat Yusuf and Islam has been explained, why is that? It's so much detail into that. What was the lesson the Quran wanted to give out of that? Secondly, the kind of details that story has with Yusuf and Islam. You will see that no other prophet has been mentioned in the same way in the Quran as the Yusuf and Islam story. The Musa, of course, has been mentioned many times. But why is that? What significance does it bring?
You see, there were two reasons. One was that these people of the book, in particular, and at the time of Mecca, they wanted to somehow cause people to doubt him as a prophet by asking him questions, awkward questions, which they thought he will not be able to answer. So there was a question on Yusuf alayhi salam that was asked by these people. There were other questions that were asked as well that were responded to in Surah Al-Kahf. But the brilliance of the Quran is that while the question regarding Yusuf alayhi salam was answered, it was answered by the narrating that story in a way that it turned out to be a beautiful story. Even today, when you read it, I mean, you're amazed how deep, how effective it is. And the other thing is that if you read the story at the time when it was being revealed, it was actually reflecting the situation of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions as well, which was quite similar to the situation of Yusuf alayhi salam, the way he was treated by his brothers. But the brilliance is that it also talked about the future. This is what he went through, thrown in the well, and then went through various different phases of his life. And then ultimately he prevailed. The idea was that you and your companions are also going to have the same fate. Ultimately, you will see the glory and success. And last but not the least, while narrating the story, at the end of this story, the Almighty says, "O Prophet, how could you have come to learn about this story had it not been the revelation of the Almighty?" Now, the deep implication is that although this story is mentioned in the Bible as well, although there are many parts of the story which are similar to what Bible says, because the story is the same, it's the same events, yet there are some parts where it is differing from what the Bible says. And if somebody is to compare the two, one can see that what the Quran is saying is making more sense, and what the Bible says is not coming together. So there were many reasons. I think another reason is that the Almighty has mentioned the stories of Nuh alayhi salam, Hud alayhi salam in different parts because they were the messengers whose entire story was of delivering the message, warning, and then the punishment coming. This is something that the Almighty wanted to let the people of Mecca, who were ultimately going to receive the same punishment, to be reminded by these stories, to be warned by these stories. So therefore, they are repeated over and over again. And honestly, when you read them, although they are repeated, they are repetition, they will not going to cause you to feel bored, because you will know that this is actually the prophet receiving this information and is being informed, and others are also being informed through him that look here, we are telling you over and over again, this has happened in the past many times, and it's going to about to happen to you. And then it happened. So it seems that Allah wants us to go through the seerah of the Prophet through the Quran.
I think the beautiful thing that you said today, and I learned, it's a very nice little quote actually, and that we, as 1400 years after the Quran, the way it is said, basically that living experience is there for us now. So that is, I think, will explain that, okay, how the people of that time will be reacting and how the Vedas would
Wow.
experience.
I don't know, you imagine you get up early in the morning, you read the Quran, and you get this pure, genuine feeling. It's no fiction. It's not unreliable. It's 100% certain. This is what Allah is telling, for example, the companions. And you know, why did I not allow you at the time when you came to Hudaybiyah, enter Makkah? Had you done it, you would have caused some people to be killed because you would have thought they were kuffar, even though they had believed. Wow. I mean, this is what Allah telling the Prophet and the companions about the wisdom why he did not allow the Muslims to proceed. This is something, the confidence, the clarity is what really makes you feel wonder if there could be anything more beautiful than that. Every other book is not 100% reliable. This is what is certain. And that is what makes it out of this world. No comparison, none whatsoever.
Like the campaign against the Mahatma Gandhi.
Absolutely.
If you look at that, and you compare that today, you see this, it's the same technique all along
Oh,
during
yes.
the century that somebody is doing good for the society. And
Absolutely.
the enemies or the opposing party, they will all
Propaganda, yeah. Evil, absolutely.
They will bring just to because they cannot basically contest the message.
Yeah.
They cannot bring an argument against it. So they will just try to diminish it by having propaganda affixed to it.
Now let me make this final statement. By making the statement, supported by the word final, you know what I'm trying to do. Honestly, it is because of this reason that we should only invite people towards the Quran, and Muslims should talk about the Quran. Otherwise, you can never, ever wipe off, finish the differences. This is the book, which is the Quran itself saying it's a book of Muslim unity. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. So, we have not given the Quran the value, the level that it deserves. And let's try it as best as we can. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.